Hello, I'm Brandy. Thanks for tuning in. In this video, we're going to be taking this 5-drawer chest and giving it a new life. I picked this sucker up off of Facebook Marketplace for just 20 bucks. Thought it was a pretty good deal. These dressers or chests seem to sell pretty quickly once they are given that fresh new look, which is what I planned on doing with throwing on some paint after doing some minor repairs. It was in pretty decent condition. There were some pieces of the veneer that were coming up on the sides, as you can see here. This side had a little bit more damage than the other side, but either way, I knew I was going to have to get out the Bondo and do some work there. The handles were pretty outdated, so I was definitely planning on putting some updated hardware on this piece. But I was super excited to get to work on it. Anytime that I get a dresser or a chest for free or close to free, 20 bucks is, not that much money to invest in something that's going to sell rather quickly. I always try to jump on the opportunity. So the first order of business was to remove all of the hardware. So I just went in with the drill and took out all of the handles. I always like to store all of the hardware in a container or in a Ziploc bag, depending on how many pieces there are and how much space is needed. I did not plan on using this hardware, but I was sure to put it all together, and then I stored that in my supply cabinet because it may come in handy on a future project. So once all of the hardware was removed, I went ahead and started giving the sucker a thorough cleaning. You always want to clean your pieces before applying any paint or product. I just used some Dawn dish soap and water, and I gave it a good scrub down, and then I went back over it with a wet rag just to wipe everything clear and give it that final rinse off before getting to work. So as I stated, I was planning on using some updated hardware and just painting the whole piece. I wasn't trying to do any stain or anything like that. So I was pretty excited to get to work on this. It's always a good thing if you know ahead of time which hardware you plan to use, because then you can measure and make sure that the existing hardware holes line up and that they'll fit. And if not, then I need to cover those holes so that I can drill new ones later. Now, a lot of times when I'm starting a project, I don't know what hardware I'm planning on using. So then I would just go ahead and cover up the holes from the get-go. For this project, I was in luck because I had these extra handles that I had actually purchased a while back for a different project, and they didn't end up working out for that. And I pulled them out and they fit the holes perfectly. So I was super excited that I wasn't going to have to purchase any hardware. I already had some stuff on hand. With a little bit of help, I was able to get this up on its back so I can evaluate the damage on the bottom of the sides. With the peeling veneer, I just go in there and start peeling off what I can. A lot of the pieces that were already kind of unattached, you could just, I was able to grab a hold of them and just peel them off. And then anything that was separating but not, that I was unable to kind of grip, I just went in and started prying that off so that I can then pull it. And that makes it easier later on for me to go ahead and put on the Bondo, which would then cover up all of these gaps and gouges, and then I could sand it smooth, and then once I paint over it, nothing ever happened. Or so it appears. Once all of the loose pieces were up, I came in with some all-purpose Bondo putty, scooped a glob of that onto a piece of cardboard, and then I mixed in the hardener cream that comes with it, Gave that a good little stir before starting to apply it. Bondo, I just love it. Ever since I started using it, can't get enough. It just works miracles in my eyes. I think it's so much easier to work with than wood filler, and it works perfectly for situations like this where you have pieces of veneer that were coming up. You rip those off, you fill in the gaps with the Bondo, and then you're able to sand that smooth, and like I said earlier, paint over it. Can't tell anything had ever happened. Once you add that cream hardener, you got to start working quick, because as soon as that cream hardener is added, the drying process has now been activated. So you got to work quick, because this stuff dries so fast, and it's, you know, it kind of sucks because you got to move quick, but it's also beneficial because with it drying so quickly, you're able to get in there and sand it shortly after. You don't have to wait, you know, hours and hours between, because it dries in a matter of like 15-20 minutes, depending on you know, how thick you've applied it. So I try to do a thin layer, especially on pieces like this, because, you know, I'm not filling in huge gouges. I'm just filling in that one small little layer. So it dries pretty quick. The other side of the dresser didn't have much damage on the bottom, but there were a few little small pieces that I did need to put some of that Bondo on. While that was drying, I went ahead and moved on to the drawer fronts. I used some 220 grit sandpaper. I wrapped it around a sanding block, and then I just went over these really quickly and did a quick scuff sand. By scuff sanding the wood, you're giving something for a little bit of texture for the paint to adhere to. So it's definitely a beneficial step in the process. After I'm done with that, I come in with a little piece of tack cloth, and I just go over it just to get up all of the dust and everything that's been created by doing that little scuff sanding. Once the Bondo had dried, I went ahead and got out the orbital sander, and I started with some 150 grit sandpaper, and I just got to sanding this down smooth. So I sanded the Bondo with the 150 grit until that was flush with the rest of the dresser, and then I went over that along with the rest of the piece with 220 grit sandpaper to make sure everything was smooth to the touch, and also to give the rest of the dresser that little bit of texture for the paint to adhere to. Once I was done sanding everything, I gave it a good wipe down and then brought it inside. Now when you see on the side here where the Bondo is, if you rub your hand over this, you cannot even feel the difference. It's just a seamless transition over that Bondo. I had also noticed during this process that there were a couple little nicks in the frame in between the drawers, so I put in a little bit of Bondo there and sanded that smooth as well. Now I was ready to prime it. I used the bin primer with shellac, and I used this primer because it would help to cover up any bleed through from the Bondo, and also help a easy transition from the darker colored wood to the lighter color paint that I planned on using. So I just had a 2-inch whatever brush that I was going to use to apply the primer to the entire piece. Once the primer had been applied to the entire dresser and the drawers, I gave it some time to dry, and then I came in with some 220 grit sandpaper just to smooth everything out. After that, came back in with a tack cloth to wipe everything clean again. After that, it was finally time to paint, the best part. I used the Behr chalk paint in the color Pale Sepia. This has become one of my favorite colors lately. People seem to love it. The pieces sell quickly with this color. It's kind of a grayish, beige-ish tone, and it looks really crisp, clean, and it's just a wonderful color that I love so much. I just used a Behr chalk paint brush or chalk brush for the entire thing. That was the only brush that I used to apply the actual chalk paints, and it worked wonderfully. If you like what you're seeing in this video so far, please remember to like and subscribe for future content. I will be coming out with a new video every week. I typically release videos on Wednesday, and I will be linking all of the products that I used in this video in the description box below. Once the paint had dried, I came in with some 220 grit sandpaper and just went over the entire piece of furniture just to give it a smoothing out before moving on to the next coat of paint. After I went over it with the sandpaper, I came back in with some tack cloth to wipe away any of the dust before moving on to the next coat of paint. Now, in order to not have the need of cleaning my brushes in between coats, I wrap everything really tightly in some plastic wrap or a Ziploc bag in this case. And then when I'm ready for the next coat of paint, I could just unravel it and it's nice and fresh, and I could just proceed to apply the next coat of paint. Now I did a total of 3 coats of paint on this entire chest, sanding in between coats, wiping it down with a tack cloth, and then moving on to the next layer of paints. So a total of 3 coats of paint. And then I came in with some Behr clear decorative wax, and I went over the entire piece with a wax brush. So I applied it with the brush, and then I wiped it back or buffed it out with a lint-free cloth. So I did this process on the entire dresser, including the drawers. The clear wax definitely darkens or deepens the color just a small bit. There is still a matte finish to this paint with the wax. However, it has a tiny bit of sheen, and it gives it that perfect protection that is needed. Now I go over the entire piece one time with the wax clear coat, and then I go over the top only, and I give that 3 coats just because I feel like that's a high traffic area. People or somebody may be putting, jewelry on top of that, maybe even a cup, hot or cold, and I want to make sure that it has that extra protection for that sort of traffic. So I did 3 coats on the top, 1 coat on the drawers and the body of the chest, and I was just very happy with the way it turned out. Once that process was complete, it was now time to put the hardware on. So I got the drill out, and then I just put the new handles on. After that, I staged it for some pictures. I posted it on Facebook Marketplace and on OfferUp, and this sucker sold in about a day. So it was a good, quick $200 profit. I was very pleased with the outcome. The color really complemented the style nicely. I was happy to have that hardware on hand. Now again, if you haven't already done so, please like and subscribe. Again, I come out with new content weekly, typically on Wednesdays. So happy that you stopped by. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Comment below if you have any suggestions on what I could have done differently, what you've done differently in your pieces, or what you think I've done terribly wrong. That's okay too. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day.